This is Duke University.
We are delighted to have President Broadhead on his inaugural visit to Orange County, and also delighted to have our distinguished alum, Duke parent, and financial expert, Bill Gross, with us as well. And tonight we will hear an exchange of ideas from two men that have insight into subjects of great importance to all of us: the state of the economy, and of course, Duke University. It's difficult, if not impossible, to read the paper or turn on the TV without hearing news about the financial crisis that has gripped the nation and the world. As the most tumultuous financial upheaval of recent memory continues to unfold, it raises many questions like, how do we get to this point, and what is the best path forward? Thankfully, we have with us here tonight someone who knows a great deal about this subject and can give us some insight into the changing nature of our economy. I'll allow President Broadhead to give you a full rundown of all the new and exciting things happening at Duke, and then he'll call Mr. Gross to the stage, and they'll have a discussion. And then at the end of that, we'll have time for questions for both of these men, and I hope that you'll hold your questions until then. A couple before I proceed, I always have to put a plug in for the Alumni Association. But first of all, I want to recognize Kevin White, our new athletic director, who is here, and I'm sure President Broadhead will mention that, and also Mrs. Broadhead, who is also here with us this evening. It's great to have them, and then Bob Shepard, Vice President for Alumni Affairs and Development in the back. But really, before I turn the program over, I want to focus on you, because you are the terrific alumni and parents who are in California and who are helping sustain Duke's engagement out here, and it's very important for us. As you may know, other than North Carolina, the largest number of alums live in California. That's increasing, and increasingly we get more and more students from California every year. We have over 6,000 alums in California, and again, the number just continues to grow. And your involvement with and commitment to Duke is so important to us. You are thousands of miles away, yet we have alums who are out here interviewing students all year long, well, not all year long, in the fall and in the spring. You come to events, you go to game watchings, you come to campus, you come to homecoming, you go to football reunions, you read Duke Magazine. You're engaged in so many ways, and all of those ways are important. And of course, our job as the Alumni Association is to get you involved, to keep you involved, but also to come up with really interesting ways for you to be engaged. And we think tonight's event is a pretty cool way to have you engaged. So thank you for being here. But it's also important to find ways that these involvements are fun and enjoyable and a great way to connect Duke people. So if you have any questions, if you need anything on campus, if there's anything we can do to help you keep you engaged, please let us know. I don't do Carolina tickets, but I'm sure Kevin will be more than happy to help you with that. And we're talking football and basketball now. It's all getting sold out. So enough of that, enough of the plug on the Alumni Association. So my job and my honor tonight is to introduce one of our special guests, President Richard Broadhead. And since becoming Duke's 9th president in 2004, President Broadhead has ushered in a new era of expansion, investment, and altruism at Duke. From the creation of the Duke Global Health Institute and the success of our financial aid initiative to the launch of our civic service program, Duke Engage, President Broadhead has been a true leader for our university, and it is my pleasure to now turn the podium and your attention over to Dick Broadhead. Thank you. Oh, you can do it. Gosh, and that was such a nice ending. What I wanted to also tell you is, please, after we are through, we will be serving dinner and have much more food and conversation, and we encourage you to stay and join with us. Thank you.
She said she was going to turn the podium over to me, and then she didn't turn the podium over to me. I'm happy to take it now, and let me just say, I have been to California many times while I've been president of Duke, but this is my first visit to Orange County, and what a great pleasure for me to have such an extraordinary turnout and to discover the size of Duke's base here. And I'm also saying I see a lot of people in this room. Many of you are graduates, but a lot of you are parents of current students. And to you and everyone who has the ability to influence a talented young person, I say, keep them coming. You've heard the program. I'm going to introduce Bill Gross in a minute, but I'll say a few words myself first, and then we'll turn to that second part. Needless to say, this has been a fall of great turbulence in the world, but in case you don't know these things, I do want you to know that this has been a time of great excitement on the Duke campus. It has been a wonderful fall, a time of great positive energy and a sense of great momentum, and I would just, who was that? I would just pick out a few things from just the last few days, things more recent, not even as old as 1 week. Last Friday we had a party on campus, 500 or 600 students were there. I'll tell you what it was for. When I became president of Duke, the first thing I said was, Duke ought to raise more endowment for financial aid. There should be more permanent support for financial aid. Education is the most valuable thing a person can get or give to another person because education is the thing that, added to human potential, enables you to deliver the value of that potential in your later life. And our country needs people to get great education. It needs people who can afford it to get great education, and it needs people of outstanding promise to get it if they can't afford it. And so we set out to raise $300 million for endowment support for financial aid, and last Friday we announced that we had reached the goal of $300 million. So we had a party. We had free food from Panda Express. We had 600 people. It was really great. And I'll tell you, the thing is, you look at an audience of students and you understand what the financial aid campaign was about. It's about investing in their potential and the lives they'll go on to live. After that party, I had to rush home and change my clothes very quickly because I had to go to the Nasher Museum. If you have not been to Duke in the last 3 years, you will say, what is that? It is our fabulous art museum designed by Raphael Vignoli that has just hosted an exhibit of paintings by El Greco and Velázquez, among others, probably the major collection or exhibition of old masters' works shown on the East Coast of America this year. On Friday night, the exhibit closed, having drawn 70,000 people to the museum this fall. But I specifically had to be there because the government of Spain sent an ambassador to bestow a knighthood on our faculty member who had curated the show. Okay? She became the Knight Commandant of the Order of Isabella of the Catholics for promoting Spanish appreciation of Spanish culture in the New World. So I saw her with her ribbon, just as earlier this fall I had seen Coach K with the many ribbons bestowed around his neck by his players. One more applause, please, when I say that I also went to Washington when Duke medicine faculty member Bob Lefkowitz, the man who discovered how cell receptors work, the basis of most modern drug therapy, when he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Science early in this fall. So it has been a pretty fun fall when everybody you know is being knighted, But I'd have to say, if you think of an art museum and a biomedical research and the Team USA basketball team, it gives you a sense of a kind of continuum of excellence. That's what we aspire to there. I went home, I went to bed, I got up, I raced to the law school. The law school has always been a great school, but it used to look like a high school. But we have now completely rebuilt it. We knocked the windows out of the library. We built new classrooms on. It is now a great structure. And Justice Kennedy of the Supreme Court came down to dedicate the building on Saturday morning. And I will tell you that that man gave a talk about the nature and meaning of the law, as profound a talk as I have probably ever listened to, with few exceptions in my adult life. I asked him if he would care to go with me to my Saturday afternoon entertainment, but he declined because he met with students at the law school for 3 hours after that ceremony was over, and that's the best kind of visit of all. Where did he fail to go with me? How about to Wallace Wade Stadium? It is regrettable that we lost last week, but I'll tell you, there were over 30,000 people in our football stadium last year. And I'll tell you, I've been at Duke now, this is my 5th year. If there had ever been 30,000 people in that stadium before, you may be sure that 28,000 of them were cheering for our opponent. We have a great football coach in David Cutcliffe. He has taken our very same players who lost all but one game last year and all their games the year before, and he's taught them how to beat Navy, how to beat Vanderbilt, how to beat UVA. It has been... And he's taught Duke that a Saturday afternoon, instead of being a dead time in the life of your community, can be another of these high points, these pulses of excellence in all of its many flavors. So that was fun. So as I say, I'm going back through these things: the Financial Aid Initiative, the Nasher Museum, Justice Kennedy, Wallace Wade. It does exemplify, I say to people, how do people tolerate living anywhere except in a university? They're so fun, because there's so many different kinds of fun that go on in them. But as you listen to what I said, I would really want to make this point, which is none of these things happened at Duke by nature, and none of them happened by accident. Everything that I mentioned was the result of Duke's specific strength in strategy, in identifying goals, in identifying priorities, summoning the support for them, and making them happen. Duke did not used to have a museum that would have attracted a show of El Greco, but it decided it needed that to be a comprehensively excellent university. It found a great architect, and now we have that on our campus. It was not slated that Duke would have a winning football team in its future, but we decided that was important. We did a strategic planning exercise for all of athletics last year. Kevin White, who came to be our director, is thought to be the best AD in America, and I believe that's just true. And so with thing after thing on the campus, we see not just happy accidents, but the result really of strategic planning, strategic investment, and the identification of priorities. I'm almost done with my remarks, but I would say this. We now come to a time that's going to be more trying for Duke and every other university than the last 10 years have been. We know that. We don't live in any world except the world we all share, and these years will be more trying. But I want to say, I personally believe that the wrong way to lead Duke at this time would be to say the period of strategic choices is now over. I believe that however hard the times may be ahead of us, it's still important and still in our power to keep saying, this is where we're good, this is what would be good to build further, and to the extent that we're able to keep building in new ways. And I'll just say one thing, because it's a high priority, which is I think that Duke, I actually do believe this, that Duke almost uniquely understands as an institution that higher education itself is going to change in the next decade or couple of decades, and that what people want from higher education is going to change, and so institutions will need to remake themselves. I would identify the changes especially this way. Old-style universities are built on the separation of everything. Separate departments, you major in one subject and not another, separate schools, a separate business school, a separate medical school, a separate engineering school. That's a fine way to do things, but it's not going to be the way people are going to need or want things in the future. In the future, people are going to need to be cross-trained. They're going to need to know how to bring different sides, different pieces of the puzzle to the table to solve the problems that challenge us. I was in India on Duke's behalf about 3 weeks ago. India produces great engineers, but what made everyone in India's ears prick up is when I said that Duke has a program that Indian students flock to that gives a degree that teaches you engineering plus business development plus the intellectual property issues of the law school. We used to teach these as separate disciplines, but if you want to take an invention and make a business out of it, you actually need to know all those different things. Certainly we know that healthcare in the future will be a problem of medical research, but it will also be a problem of devices that can deliver medical research. But the problems of healthcare are largely problems of policy rather than of biomedical discovery, of policy and of economics. So we'll need people who know how to put those things together rather than just to take them apart. Furthermore, I believe that in the future, we're going to approach students not as people who need to know what we know, but we're going to need to think of them as active organisms that are always reaching out and snatching bits of knowledge and assembling it on their own, in their own active way, for their own changing purposes. And I see this, when I look at our student body, I see this as something we are very intentional about promoting. My first week as president, I had a visit from a student. I'll tell you his name. It was Mark Younger. He's from California. He was an engineering student, and he said, we have taken all these classes, but what we really want to do is we want to build a house in which we would design all the systems ourselves. We would design the air handling. We would design the use of water. We would design the media. And then the next year, students would be smarter than us, so they could rip them all out and design new versions of these things. No other university in America would have encouraged these students at all, I don't think. Duke has now this place called the Smart Home that was designed by students, and it is inhabited by students, and every year the students reinvent it and recreate it, taking things they learned in class out of class and putting them in practice. And you may have received the news that the Smart Home was identified as the first platinum LEED human residence on any American university on the planet of Earth. I'll tell you one other story, and then I'm done. In my line of work, people come to your office. I had 3 students come to see me about 2 weeks ago. One was a former woman varsity tennis player. One was a young man who had recently been on our football team. One was a current member of our track team. They wanted to tell me what they had done last summer. They had organized a program in Vietnam called Coach for College, in which they had, one of them had had an internship in Vietnam and had become interested in it. They put together a kind of compound where they taught 80 students English and science and sports in the course of the summer. What did you use for facilities? I said. Oh, we built one. Well, how did you get the funding? I said. Oh, the State Department has grants for these things. So, trolling on websites, a group of random students saw this website, put in for a grant, won the grant, built a sports facility in Vietnam, at which they also taught a gang of kids English and physics, and themselves learned something about a culture other than their own. These students were supported by our new program called Duke Engage. I do not regard this as an extracurricular activity. I regard it as the height of education. They learned something about the world, but they also learned that they could take the things they've learned and put them together in new ways. And one of the things they told me is that they were working in a country where education typically proceeds by rote memorization, and that they had found their training as student athletes especially valuable in this context because they'd used all the team building and initiative building and leadership building skills that they had learned in Duke playing fields to help set up this program in Vietnam. I'd have to say, I don't know, our endowment is down this year. Someone asked me if it was down as much as a famous university's huge endowment is rumored to be down. My answer is no, ours is down apparently way less than that, and I hope that that stays true. We'll face challenges, but I would say I would like to think that Duke has as much business in the future of identifying important goals of the changing world of education and continuing to advance to them. I'd like to think that's going to be our career in the future as much as has been in the past. And with the support of people like you, I'm wagering that that will be so. So thanks. But I know you did not come to hear me. Let me introduce Bill Gross. And Bill, would you come up and take one of these armchairs? And as you saunter up, I will just quickly introduce you. I think this guy is pretty well known. He came from the southern part of Ohio between Dayton and Cincinnati. He came to Duke on an A.B. Duke scholarship and graduated in 1966. Then by a chapter of history that perhaps he will reveal to us, he ended up living out here and founding something called PIMCO, the Pacific Investment Management Company, where you have made a specialty of doing fixed income asset investment, and now have, I believe, or at least I heard, $800 billion under management? Yeah, it's a lot.
Last check, yes.
I always have to remember not to say million. All right. And then in addition, through your fame in this line of work, you have also become a national commentator, and everybody's seen you on Louis Rukeyser, and you wrote a book called something like Why Everything You Know About Investing is Wrong, which I've often felt is totally literally true. And then, of course, your most recent fame is because you were one of the people who prophesied the meltdown of housing values and the consequences that have unfolded from that. And I have now seen you quoted almost daily in every news source, offering your views on what's right to do. And didn't I see that you had even offered at no expense to tell the government what to do about distressed and troubled assets and how you could pick and choose among them?
Thank goodness they didn't take us up on it.
Oh, I don't know. But there's one. If you know all these things, there's still one thing you may not know about Bill Gross, which is he and his wife Sue made the first gift to what became the Financial Aid Initiative. They gave the cornerstone gift that whole structure was built on. So I am grateful to you for joining us as a sample Duke alum to talk about the economic circumstances, but I'm also happy to have this chance to express my gratitude to you for your service to that hugely important cause.
Thank you, Dick.
Okay?
Thanks.
Put her there. Now, I have a microphone. Is it actually working? Yeah? Oh,
Yep.
Whoa, look how loud I can be. So I'm going to ask some questions just because they're questions anybody would want to know the answer to, and then we'll throw the floor open and both of us will take some questions then.
Okay.
First of all, okay, so you spent your boyhood in southern Ohio, and then you went to Duke, and then now you're the man of PIMCO. So how did that story work out? How did you get from, what is it, Middletown, Ohio?
Middletown, Ohio,
Yeah.
to San Francisco, and then to Duke. And I took a Greyhound bus, by the way, Dick, to
Those were the days.
every fall, the Greyhound bus back to Durham. And it was a slow ride back from Durham to San Francisco, I'll tell you, in May. But that's how we did it back then. But Duke, Duke had the fascination of not only the campus, the basketball, the institution. But I think for me, the difference in culture, I mean, it's one thing to grow up in San Francisco on the West Coast, on the left coast, I guess. And it's another thing to go back to Duke and to be part of the Southern culture. One quick story. My first freshman year, and Andy Ash, who's my old fraternity brother, sitting up in the front row. I haven't seen him in a number of years, and thanks for coming, Andy. But and he probably remembers this too. But taking the bus from east to west campus, between classes, and the bus suddenly stopped at 12 o'clock, and I said to the driver, "What's going on? I got a class to make," and she said, "Well, it's lunchtime." This was 1962. This was the Southern style of education, so to speak, and much different than in San Francisco. And it was very much of a plus for me to have experienced that, and a plus as well to experience being a sort of a small piece of cheese in a big cheese campus. I mean, it's one thing, as some of you may know, having been at Duke, that it's one thing to be a big cheese in high school. You come back to Duke and you're suddenly put in your place, and I think that sort of helps as you go on in life. You recognize that we're all just little pieces of cheese, and struggling to get along.
In one big fondue. All right, so here's something not everyone knows about Bill Gross, that he actually tried out for the basketball team. And has pursued investment as an alternative career.
Very true.
Okay, but we're here in the middle of grave times, and I know that people seek your opinion about these things. And I'll just ask a really obvious question, which is, what if your phone rang on the way home, and it were the president-elect, who said, although we say there's only one president at a time in this country, everybody's looking to me, there's all these things that need to be decided, we have this bailout plan in place, but every week it seems to be tilted in a somewhat different way. So whatever you tell me is the very thing I'm going to do, so please make sure that the answer is correct. And here's my question, which is the government doing the things it would be best for the government to do? Are the things we're doing the right things to do? Are they all of the right things to do? Your answer, please.
Well, not all of the things, and admittedly, they've done them ad hoc and in some cases rather slowly, and not in coordination with other global policymakers, which is part of the problem. But the central problem, Dick, is simply that our finance-based economy, the U.S., the global finance-based economy, is delevering, and that's sort of a hard concept to understand because for 50, 60, 70 years, our economy has been levering. We've been a society of debt. We've been a society of non- or dis-savers. We've been a society that likes to shop till we drop, that has been encouraged to spend even after 9/11. And so the levering of this society in terms of consumption orientation has been significant and taken place almost unnoticed because it's been a long, long journey from perhaps the end of World War II to perhaps the beginning of 2007 when Bear Stearns first sort of crept into the lexicon. But the world has changed now, and Obama, I think, and of course now Paulson and Bush have to recognize that the rules have changed and that the private sector has a problem. The private sector has a deep hole, and it has to be filled and substituted for by the public sector, much like we had in the 1930s with FDR. That's a shock. That's something that private market ideology is not receptive towards, and that's the conflict that we're seeing even day to day and hour to hour now with Paulson, Bush, and the auto companies, and Obama on the other side. But it's something that I think is necessary, and the trillions of dollars that will be spent, and there will be trillions of dollars. We will have a $1.5 trillion deficit in 2009. It's staggering. But the fact is that it has to take the place of a private sector that has levered until it can lever no more, and now is delevering. It has to substitute for that.
What if somebody said that the levering is just switching then, so that now it becomes levered against the government? And what are the consequences, in your view, of the assumption of a debt of that size?
Right, and there are significant consequences. There will be. We have a saving grace to some extent because we start out as a government, as a federal deficit, as a percentage of GDP at a relatively low level, somewhere in the mid-40s, as opposed to some countries which are significantly higher. So there's room, and there's the trillions of dollars, so to speak, that will form the deficit over the next few years will add to that percentage of GDP and have significant consequences, not just for interest rates, but for the direction of the dollar and for our place and our standing within the world. A beggar nation, to the extent that we will become one and continue to beg for financing from foreign countries, it is in a difficult position. Basically, we're not and won't be in a position of making the rules like we have been for the past 50 years. And that, again, is another change, another comeuppance, I suppose, that President Obama will have to begin to adjust to.
Well, you lead me to a question I intended to ask, not right now, but I'll ask it now, which is, when this crisis is past, I'm sure there's many people who hope we will have come back to the place we were before. You're suggesting we're going to come out at a different place. So where do you see the role of the United States or the place of the United States in the global order on the other side of this crisis?
Well, the United States will still be the leader economically and the leader militarily, but admittedly less of a leader. There are meetings underway at this, not at this moment, but certainly today, the G20 meeting, in which Sarkozy and others have come to the United States not necessarily in a spirit of cooperation, but in a spirit of reducing the United States to its level. That's always been the objective of France, of course, and now now they have us in their sights, so to speak. So the U.S. will be a leader. It takes a long time for a reserve currency nation to become a non-reserve currency nation. That happened to the U.K. As it wound its way through World War II and exited on the other side. But the United States, I think, can no longer and will no longer have the same prominence that we've had for the past 50 years since Bretton Woods.
My next question is one that must be the one everybody asks you, which is, you're a man with a crystal ball. You saw some things in the future before they became present, and other people didn't see them. What are you seeing 2 or 3 years from now as the state of the American economy?
Well, I see slow economic growth, and hopefully that. There's no doubt that for the next 12 months, maybe even longer, there'll be some negative signs. In terms of GDP, there'll be some much higher plus signs in terms of unemployment. There'll be a state of the economy, a standard of living that unfortunately will not be what it was 12 to 24 months ago. It doesn't mean a Great Depression. It doesn't mean even a Great Recession with an R, but it does mean significant adjustments. Dick, this is a financial crisis, but Obama or whoever succeeds him 4, 8, 12 years down the road has other significant crises that relate to not only energy, which was the tenet basically of the campaign, but crises which were neglected during the campaign in terms of demographics, in terms of savings, in terms of retirement, in terms of health care, $40 to $50 trillion worth of future liabilities thanks to boomers such as myself. So this country has a tough road to sled. It doesn't mean we can't make it. It doesn't mean that Obama, as the leader with a spirit of hope, much like FDR in terms of not fearing fear itself, et cetera, can't prevail and can't move this country forward. But it will move more slowly than we're used to, and I think that will take some adaptation by all of us.
Well, we did a panel on the Duke campus, and I think that the date of it must have been about the 25th of September. So it was when things were already quite rocky, but by no means as rocky as they then became. And we had faculty from the law school, the business school, the economics department, the political science department. And a question I asked then, the way I put it was, don't forget, we didn't know then who would be elected president. Will the next president have any fun? And what I meant by that was, of course, whoever is president has to deal with the hard things of that time, but whoever runs for president has a program of aspirations. Their aspiration can't only be to deal with challenges. Do you think that the next administration or two is just going to have to devote resources so exclusively to economic recovery that everything else is going to be put on the back burner? Or are you one of the people who argues that dealing with the energy crisis or dealing with healthcare can be a way to economic recovery?
I think the latter, and that's a good point. It was made in the campaign. I think to a certain extent it's true that resources devoted to energy, resources devoted to healthcare are positive stimuli for GDP growth. I also think, though, that they're not necessarily productive from the standpoint of what we know as productive capital. I mean, to the extent that you have to substitute something for something that was very easy in terms of pumping out of the ground in Texas, or even now pumping out of the ground in terms of the Middle East, to have to substitute with massive capital expenditures for wind or for solar or for whatever. It may provide jobs, but it's a substitution and sort of a sidestep, I guess, on the way to a higher standard of living. And the same thing with healthcare. Jobs, yes, lots of jobs for healthcare, but is it helpful that boomers are getting older and getting sicker and will require the healthcare? Not really as a society. It's better to be young, vibrant, not have any health problems, and to basically devote the productive resources and investment that you have to increasing your standard of living. it's really going to be a difficult period of time. And as I mentioned to you over drinks about 30 minutes ago, bond people are pessimists at heart. And by their nature, that's why we manage bonds and not stocks or real estate. So take some of this with a grain of salt.
You're a pessimist by profession, but I don't get the impression that you're a pessimist by nature, because I actually think you've given fairly optimistic answers to some of the questions that I've asked you. And I'll ask you two more, and then we'll throw it open to others. And one of them is this. If this is a game-changing moment, then we're going to live in a different culture as well as a different economic order. I mean, it was a different culture when people saved 20% of their disposable income, and then it was a change of culture that made people spend all their disposable income and a great deal more. What kind of culture are you going to guess is going to be on the other side of this economic transformation?
You know, that's a good one. And you know, making forecasts for cultures, it is obviously much more challenging than forecasts for bond markets.
Well, no one has ever done it. No one has ever done it successfully, but here's your chance.
You know, my wife Sue and I argue about this. We don't argue. We talk about it all the time. We talk about generational changes, even absent the financial crises and the necessity to reorient your habits and savings proclivities. But yeah, I think at some point, and it's hard to forecast a generational shift now because of it is a me generation. You know, let's face it, and even the boomers are used to me. Okay, we've had benefits all the way up in terms of VA benefits and you know, the benefits of lower interest rates and the benefits of leverage and the financial innovations that I've spoken to. So all of us are me generation people. I just think at some point it's going to have to be a less of a me generation type of culture, by necessity a sacrifice type of culture. Obama's called for it in many ways in terms of public service. It will be mandated almost by necessity in terms of higher savings rates, in terms of fewer jobs than we would want, and in terms of lower returns, perhaps importantly, at least from the standpoint of investing in retirement, than we're used to. So the me will give way to the us, and hopefully the us can all get along, which is, as you know, is a problem during periods in which the pie doesn't grow as fast as it used to.
All right, now my last one. You know, I'm in an industry. I'm in the education industry. Everyone in this room, there are things we all share as people who live at this same economic moment. But I want to ask if you have any thoughts specifically about higher education or specifically about universities at this time. And if you have no other thought, then I'll ask you this question, which even I know I never should ask this, which is, I suggested that I think a school like Duke, even if we don't have the, you know, we had 26% return on our endowment 2 years ago. We won't see that again this year or next year. But it seems to me extremely important for the university to keep defining its aspirations in a positive light and moving in new directions. And I just wonder your thoughts about that.
Well, I think in general, and certainly not specific to Duke, because Duke is at the top in many ways. But I think universities, and perhaps worldwide, but certainly in the United States, are failing because the students and the parents of the students are not demanding the right things from them. I mean, we're really not preparing our students for a global society and a global economy in which we have to be competitive. Those that offer pass-fail, those that offer no grades whatsoever, are not doing a service to students because American students, when they get out of their universities, have to compete against Chinese students. And so there's a brave new, tough new world out there that I think universities in the United States have to begin to prepare their students for. I don't think that's happening at the moment.
I got to ask a lot of questions, and it was very fun. And maybe I'll be willing to share the fun as part of the us generation. We have a microphone here and a microphone here, and if any of you have questions for either Bill or myself, we'll do our best to answer them. Fine. Sir.
Please. And that's a difficult one. You know, recognizing that if you've owned real estate, stocks, or even bonds, that 12 months ago, you were 20, 30, 40% richer than you are today. And that your retirement nest egg that you plan for, and whether it's in your portfolio or in your home, all of it in combination, is not what you wanted it to be. Will it come back? Is your question? Do I hold on? I don't. No, I don't think necessarily it will come back. And I'm talking about all assets because they were unfortunately levered and pushed to levels that were unrealistic. The fact that someone in Modesto, California, would buy a home for $500,000 that had sold 24 months before at $250,000, you know, was simply a mistake. As were the dot-coms, as were, you know, many stocks, and as were many levered bonds and bond structures, by the way, simply 12 to 24 months ago. The subprimes being the prime example, so to speak. So assets have come down. Will they go back up to those types of levels in the stock market, for instance? Will the Dow go from 8,500 back up to 13,000 or 14,000? Yeah, it will in time, but it will probably take, a doubling, so to speak, takes 10 years with a rule of 72 at 7.2%. And those are the types of returns they think you should begin to expect. You can't expect double-digit types of returns anymore because the leverage is gone and the ability to lever is gone. The Morgan Stanleys, the Goldman Sachs, the Merrill Lynches, the J.P. Morgans, the Citis, the Bank of Americas, all of them were levered, levered, levered. The hedge funds are coming down. The hedge funds are disappearing. The leverage is disappearing. And it was the leverage that worked the magic. It was the leverage that worked the magic for that family in Modesto that thought they could afford their home at $500,000 and could do no more than $250,000 in terms of reality. So yes, the darkness will turn into dawn. Yes, stocks will go up again, but they will not return to the heyday. They will not be an asset class, nor will real estate, nor will the bond market, in terms of providing what you think you had, but now are discovering that you don't have. Be realistic. Expect, returns in the 5 to 10% category. This economy, delevered, can provide no more.
Over here, please.
Yes, may I, could you hear me? Yeah, may I ask specifically on real estate, and you may have addressed part of this in your last answer, but do you think the real estate market has bottomed out at this point? I have some experience helping my son trying to find a condo locally, and the short sale market is just as hot as I've ever seen it. And it seems to me at this point there are many properties that are, upside down, and I was wondering what your insight might be in the foreseeable future. Do you think it's going to go down much more than it is now?
Well, I'm not an expert there. Although Sue and I walk Corona Del Mar every weekend, and we go into every open house, believe it or not. It's a nice way to pass the time, and so we have a sense of at least local values. But housing, was and is the most levered product that an American will own. To the extent that there's a 10 or a 20% down payment now, it's a 5 times levered type of vehicle. And to the extent that we're moving into a delevered world requiring higher down payments, and in some cases higher interest rates, it's not a positive for housing. Now, on the other side, you've got Sheila Bair, thank goodness, somebody in the administration recognizes the problems of the homeowner as opposed to the problems of Wall Street. Okay, so you've got Sheila Bair with the FDIC and her potential programs to reduce principal payments, to reduce interest rates, to, in a sense, make it easier for existing homeowners to survive, and therefore for home prices eventually to stop going down and to go up. Short answer, just to finish it, probably another 5 to 10%. Then we stop, but don't expect, again, like the stock market, don't expect to be. If you bought your home 3 years ago, don't expect to see it, perhaps for a decade. It doesn't happen.
Over here, please.
Real quick, Mr. Gross, pleasure having you here tonight. First off, what do you see the possibility of the United States government losing its AAA status? Question one. Question two, as a person in the banking industry, where do you see the 8,000 community banks that we currently have out there? Where do you see that 3 to 5 years from now?
Okay. Great questions. We don't have enough time for all this. And I talk too much, don't I, Dick?
I got all night.
The status, the AAA status of the United States is really not a function of Moody's or Standard & Poor's. We've seen how poorly they perform in terms of quality ratings. It's really a function of and is reflected primarily in the flight of the status of the dollar. The currency is your reflection of the world in terms of how they view us as a credit. If the dollar goes up, strong credit. If it goes down, weak credit. Iceland, for instance, the biggest hedge fund in the world, there's an island, all they do is fish. But for some reason, they had 3 banks that aggregated tens and tens of billions of dollars in terms of assets, and now they have nothing. And the Icelandic dollar is plunging. People recognize that all they do is fish. So what happens to the United States going forward? I think it'll be reflected in the dollar. I think ultimately the dollar will decline, not collapse, but will decline simply because our economy, relative to other economies, relative to the Asian economies, not relative to the UK. The UK is about the one country that's worse off than we are in terms of leverage and doing it wrong. So we'll do well against the pound. But everything else, the dollar will probably decline, and that will reflect, not a AAA status, but maybe a AA, a lesser ranking than what we've had in the past. In terms of banking, real quick, we've got 8,000 banks. That's the problem. The particular saving grace for other countries in the UK, they've got a small amount of banks. In Europe, a much smaller amount of banks, and so they've been able to take care of the situation, so to speak, to take care of business quicker than what we have here. How do you save the Bank of Newport? How do you save the Bank of Vallejo? There's 8,000 of these guys. How does Paulson, one by one, see whether one's salvageable and one isn't? So what they've got in mind, what they've done, they've gone to a bunch of super banks, 8 or 9 super banks, JPM, Bank of America, B of A, et cetera, et cetera. This will be the block. This is the club. We call it the Club of America. This is the Club of America going forward, for better or worse. These are the banks that are not only too big to fail, but are partnered with the government. The government owns 20% of these banks going forward. These will be the banks towards which all of the other banks aggregate. There are some large regionals. They'll survive. They'll be part of the club too. But the 8,000 banks, gone. Okay, and it doesn't mean they'll default. They'll either default as they do one by one on a Friday afternoon, or else they'll be purchased by some of the bigger regionals and some of the bigger banks. Ultimately, what they're trying to work towards is a banking system with perhaps 20 to 50 banks, not 8,000 banks that they can control, manage, and regulate.
Sir.
On the auto front, it's a very current topic right now. Using it as an example of other industries. If you were talking to Paulson tomorrow,
Well, this is a little biased and prejudiced. We got $1 billion in GM. Okay.
And now his reply.
And by the way, with full disclosure, we had $3 billion in Lehman Brothers, and it's all gone. Okay, so things happen, and even PIMCO isn't Snow White and does everything perfectly. But what I would say, I guess I'm on the democratic side of this argument. And recognizing the problems of bailing out one after the other, ad hoc, first Wall Street, finance, and now industry, and what's next? Retail? Or will we bail out Neiman Marcus? How far does it go? And you're listening to a registered Republican, so it's not like I've always been to the left side of the middle. But the fact is that that the auto industry is significant. Yes, they make bad cars. Yes, they have to change. Yes, they have to downsize. All of those things. But to let them go now, in the midst of this financial crisis would be more chaotic for Main Street than Lehman Brothers was for Wall Street. It can't happen. They even Paulson today said, I hope there's a way to save them. Bush is doing his little dance with Colombia and the free trade agreement, which is nonsense. What they need to do is put up some money, and yes, it's pathetic, it's a shame, it shouldn't have happened, it's not capitalism, but that's the hole that we're in.
Sir.
Bill, it's been over 40 years since we last spoke. I'm Phil Perrine from Las Vegas.
Of course. Hi, Phil.
And
This man is the head of the Duke Club of Las Vegas.
question that I have for you is, for most of the people in the room here, they're still contributing to 401ks, they're still investing. And where should we be putting our money now, especially in view of Obama's promise to raise taxes on dividends and capital gains? Is it munis or PIMCO bond funds or what do you recommend, Bill?
This is where my wife Sue would say, "Don't say anything." They'll just come back and remind you that you made a mistake, and that's happened many times. And of course, your question is dependent, which is the problem. Your question is dependent upon lots of things, on your age, on your risk proclivities, on your situation, how much you have to lose, all of those things. I can't answer that for everybody. What I can say is that at the moment, that an investment in corporate bonds, high-quality corporate bonds, the club, the banks, to the extent that you can find them, is a very attractive way to go because it yields 8, 9, and 10%, and basically they're government guaranteed in our type of opinion. An investment in stocks, has a problem. Once we stop the bleeding, and I think it'll be stopped, once we stop the bleeding, we have to ask what kind of world is this ahead of us in terms of profits, in terms of margins, in terms of regulations, in terms of compensation, the willingness of corporations to take risk as opposed to just recently, 12 to 24 months ago. What will happen over the next 5 to 10 years? I see a much changed environment. Just remember this, if you remember anything from tonight, this is a new world. This is not the world of the past 50 years. It has changed. It is over. This is a demarcation point in which new rules, thanks to Bill Maher, I guess, new rules take hold here. It's like Newton and Einstein. Newton, the rules of large objects. Einstein, the world of small objects. Going from one to the other is almost impossible to comprehend unless you're some brilliant intellect, and it can be done and has been done, and I'm sure Dick can do it easily. But for most of us, it's really hard.
Ask me later.
It's really hard, and so it's really hard now. How could it have changed so quickly? Where could the money have gone? Why doesn't it come back? the rules are changed because we're delevering and not levering, and we'll be delevering for a long time. And so you must recognize that, first of all, that taking risk in the same way that you did before is over. It's gone. You shouldn't do it. You should be looking at investments that are adaptive to this new world, and those types of investments are more investments in regulated types of entities, bond types of investments, and not to push any particular product, but equity and commodities and real estate on the extreme exterior of risk are levered types of investments. Those investments are gone, not from the standpoint of the wealth disappearing, but from the standpoint of double-digit returns. They're gone, and so get used to that. Go from Newton to Einstein, and you will be a better survivor going forward.
Please.
Yes, Mr. Gross, pleasure having you here this evening. In addition to the 40 new acronyms that we've now developed throughout this process, we've seen the government absolutely explode and become now involved in just about every aspect of our lives. Do you see over the next 3 to 5 years a government that's going to want to continue to go in this area, which sort of smacks in the face of capitalism as we know it? Or do you see this as something that is in fact temporary, and that we're going to see a government that's going to want to extract itself from this position, or going to take the opportunity to continue to grow and grow and become more and more involved?
Right. I think government involvement is with us for a generation. It was with us for at least 2 generations with FDR. We never really got out of it, did we not, until Reagan. I mean, even Nixon basically said we're all Keynesians now. And so it took, It took 40 to 50 years to get out of the encumbered grasp of government in terms of regulation. And now, unfortunately, we're going back because the private sector overdid it. The invisible hand of capitalism, Adam Smith's invisible hand, is now turning into the visible and hopefully benevolent fist, the benevolent fist of government. Okay, and I say this not in support. I say this not in support of it. I say this only because it's necessary. Because unless it happens, we have an economy, not just nationally, but an economy globally, which will not do well, and in fact, to shock you, without the fist, may not survive. And there have been days, there have been moments, there have been weeks, there have been discussions with Treasury officials, Fed officials, in which, as Sue well knows, when I have gone home and I said, this game is over. And it has come very close on a day-to-day basis in many situations over the past 3 to 6 months. So I say this not to scare you, just to indicate the realistic necessity for government to substitute its fist for the invisible hand of private enterprise. It shouldn't be that way, but frankly, it is that way, and it's that way because it's my fault, it's Dick's fault, it's your fault, it's everybody's fault who basically took the Kool-Aid and basically said, we can live off our house, we can live off our portfolio, all we have to do is take a little more risk. It went too far, and now we're going to pay the consequences. Sorry, I wish it were not the way.
I'll take you, and I'll take you, and then I think we got to wrap this up. Please.
I'd like to ask some pointed questions of those who can answer them. As far as the cost of living increase, as far as inflation, how do you see these things impacting the entire economy?
Well, hopefully, and this sounds extreme and something almost comical, but we should all hope for inflation, because that's what the government's trying to do. The government's trying to reflate a deflationary economy. It's trying to fill what they call a liquidity trap with liquidity and with government investment as opposed to private investment. So we should hope for that 4 to 5% inflation, because if we don't get it, what we at least have got to look forward to is Japan in the 1990s. An economy which basically went nowhere, and at worst, of course, a 1930s, not in the extreme, not a big D, but a big R, in which the economy simply doesn't grow. So hope for inflation, hope for 4 to 5% or even larger, because at some point you can then get a Volcker coming in to basically rein it in, within the context of private and free enterprise anew. But if you don't get to the inflation, if you continue to get deflation and a deterioration in asset values, which is the destructive part of that deflation, then we're basically all in trouble. I do think, PIMCO does think, that 3 to 4 years out, that we will get that 3 to 4 to 5% inflation. And in that type of environment, yes, bonds are no good. And in that type of environment, yes, stocks and commodities and houses are better. That's what you should hope for if you own a house. You should hope for 10% inflation, because that would push the price of your house up 10% a year, and you're levered 5 to 1, and that's a pretty grand investment. So, let's cross our fingers for inflation and not for deflation.
I saw one hand out here, and I said I'd take one more. It was you.
No, I think they've just been part of the entire complex. Like I said, when I pointed to Dick and myself and you guys, we're all in this, and not necessarily all with equal guilt, so to speak. You could point to villains in terms of those that took the most leverage, those that took the most risk, but that could just as well have been, mom and pop in the fee structure. I don't blame them for taking chances, for taking risk, for taking leverage, because they signed up clients and they used the clients' money. Unfortunately, what they got caught up in was a point in time, a point in history, I guess, the end of history, the end of levering, from which they inevitably, were to crash and burn. There will be hedge funds in the future, but to the extent that many clients are now disenfranchised and discouraged, certainly in terms of their existing returns, there will be far fewer of them. But I wouldn't blame them for anything. I would just as easily blame Greenspan. I would just as easily blame the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, the Reagan administration, the Carter administration, the Nixon administration. Oh, I forgot Ford. I blame them all because they were all part of this magical mystery tour that suggested that productivity and standard of living could be infinitely supported by rising asset prices, whether it's a home, stocks, commercial real estate, or whatever. It just doesn't happen. Production and wealth come really from hard work, innovation, ideas, thinking, education, properly directed. That's where wealth comes from, and we forgot that a long time ago.
Well, I'll just wrap up by saying this, which is universities give many things to the world. They give ideas, they give discoveries, they give things that drive the economy. But the main thing that universities can contribute to the world is trained intelligence. And you're not the only intelligent person in the world, but we certainly are grateful to you for stepping forward at this time and sharing your intelligence with us. You're a great alum. We are all free to disagree with you if we like, But I think that this has been very illuminating for all of us, and I'm very grateful to you for being up here with me.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.